It was supposed to be a regular Friday night, a typical date, a chance to meet someone new and see where things went. I had been chatting with Lyra for a few days. She seemed interesting, smart, funny, and just a little mysterious. Honestly, I didn't think much of it when she asked me out. It wasn't until later that night that I realized I'd stepped into something much bigger than I could have ever imagined. I'd met her online, in one of those dating apps where you browse pictures, swipe left or right, and chat with people. At first, our conversations were light, nothing too serious, just the usual small talk, hobbies, favorite books, movies, and things like that. But every now and then, I'd notice something strange in the way she wrote. Lyra's grammar was perfect, too perfect. She always used words I'd never heard anyone use, and there was something about her tone that felt otherworldly. I brushed it off at first. Maybe she was just someone who liked to use fancy words. When she suggested we meet in person, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. The butterflies were there, but there was also a slight unease in the pit of my stomach. I couldn't quite explain why. She was polite, respectful, and seemingly normal, but there was an underlying feeling that this wouldn't be your typical dinner and a movie date. I was nervous as I got ready that evening. I didn't want to overthink it, but it was hard not to. I had been on dates before, of course, but there was something different about this one. Maybe it was because Lyra was so different. She had an air of mystery around her that I found intriguing. We had agreed to meet at a small, quiet cafe in the middle of the city, a place where we could talk and get to know each other without too many distractions. I arrived a little early, scanning the room for any sign of her. Then I saw her. Lyra walked in, and for a moment, I thought I was imagining things. She stood out in the crowd, not because of her beauty, though she was stunning, but because of the way she carried herself. There was something graceful about her movements, as if she was floating rather than walking. Her skin had an unusual glow to it, but I couldn't quite place what was different. Her eyes were deep and seemed to pierce through me, making me feel like she could see straight into my thoughts. I stood up quickly, a little flustered, trying to pull myself together. "Hi, Lyra," I said, smiling nervously. "Hello," she replied with a soft smile. "It's so nice to finally meet you in person." Her voice was calming, melodic, almost hypnotic. I couldn't help but feel drawn to her. We sat down at a small table by the window, and the conversation began just like any other date. Small talk, the usual questions about family, work, and what we liked to do for fun. I found myself laughing more than I expected, and the unease from earlier started to melt away. But there were moments when Lyra's responses felt just a little too rehearsed. She asked questions that didn't seem to match the flow of the conversation, and sometimes she paused for a bit too long before answering. As the evening wore on, I started to feel a little more comfortable, even though a part of me kept telling me there was something not quite right. The night had been pleasant so far, and I was genuinely enjoying myself. But then came the moment that would change everything. After the main course, Lyra reached into her bag and pulled out something I wasn't expecting. She placed a thick, official-looking document on the table in front of me. My first thought was that it was some sort of joke, a silly contract for a date, maybe something to lighten the mood. But when I glanced at the title, my heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a joke. It was a legal document. "Oh, what's this?" I asked, eyeing the paper suspiciously. Lyra looked at me with those piercing eyes, her gaze steady and calm. "This is the agreement I need you to sign," she said, her tone firm but not unkind. "It's very important." I laughed nervously. "What is this? Some sort of contract for dessert? Or a challenge?" I tried to make light of it, but she didn't smile. She was serious, way too serious for a first date. "No," she replied softly. "This is a breeding contract." My mind went blank for a second. I must have misheard her. "A breeding contract," I repeated, my voice sounding a little too loud in the quiet cafe. "What are you talking about?" Lyra remained calm, explaining that the document was a real binding contract. Her people, the Valdari, had been searching for humans with specific genetic traits. According to her, Earth's population had become valuable across the galaxy, and they wanted to ensure that certain human genetics were preserved and passed on. She went on to explain that I, apparently, had the right genetic traits they were looking for. The contract wasn't for a one-time date. It was a formal agreement to have children together, with those children being raised to help improve the Valdari species. I stared at her, trying to process the words coming out of her mouth. It felt like I had fallen into the middle of a science fiction novel. Was this some kind of elaborate prank? Was she being serious? She wasn't laughing or even joking. She looked at me with such intensity that I started to wonder if she wasn't kidding after all. I couldn't wrap my head around it. A breeding contract. Was she serious? My stomach churned, and I started to feel a mix of confusion, disbelief, and anger. I had come out for a simple date, not to get involved in some intergalactic genetic program. I looked around the cafe, trying to get a sense of whether anyone else was hearing this conversation. But everyone seemed oblivious to the fact that a woman was offering me a contract to have kids with her species. I felt completely out of my element. Lyra, this is insane, I stammered. You're telling me that you want me to sign a contract to have children with you. Why? What's in it for me? Her expression softened. She wasn't angry or defensive. She simply explained that it wasn't about what I could gain. It was about the future of her people. The Valdari were facing a serious genetic crisis, and they believed that human genetics could help them survive and thrive. She wasn't offering me riches or rewards. What she was asking for was far more important, something that would change the course of her people's history. You don't have to decide right away, she said gently. Take your time. But this is a serious offer, one that comes with responsibilities. There are no easy choices here. I sat there, completely stunned. I had never been good at handling big decisions, and this one felt impossible. I had always dreamed of doing something extraordinary with my life, but this was not the kind of extraordinary I had imagined. The weight of what she was saying began to sink in. Could I really say no to this? Could I refuse to be part of something this huge? At the same time, how could I possibly agree to something so bizarre? Lyra slid the contract across the table toward me. It was thick, formal, and covered in alien symbols. Just think about it, she said softly, her voice almost hypnotic. You don't have to sign it tonight, but I want you to understand what you're being offered. I took a deep breath and glanced down at the contract once more. My mind was racing, but I couldn't deny that a small part of me was intrigued. There was something about Lyra, something about the way she spoke and carried herself, that made me feel like this wasn't just some strange coincidence. There was a reason I was sitting here. There was a reason she was offering this to me. And for better or worse, I was going to have to decide what to do next. I sat there staring at the contract, my heart pounding in my chest. The cafe felt quieter than ever, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the entire world had paused, just waiting for me to make a decision. But how could I make a decision? I had never even imagined something like this would happen. Just a few hours ago, I was looking forward to a simple dinner with a woman I had met online, and now I was holding a contract that, if I signed it, could change the course of my life forever. Lyra was watching me closely, her eyes calm and steady. She wasn't pressuring me, but her presence was enough to make the situation feel more real. There was no denying it. What she was offering was no joke. The seriousness in her eyes told me that whatever this was, it had consequences, big ones. Lyra, I began, but I didn't know how to finish the sentence. What could I possibly say? How do you react when someone offers you a breeding contract with an alien species? Are you serious? I finally managed to ask. This is real. She nodded, her expression unwavering. Yes, it's very real. A breeding contract. I repeated, my voice sounding a little too loud in the quiet cafe. What are you talking about? Lyra remained calm, explaining that the document was a real binding contract. Her people, the Valdari, had been searching for humans with specific genetic traits. According to her, Earth's population had become valuable across the galaxy, and they wanted to ensure that certain human genetics were preserved and passed on. She went on to explain that I, apparently, had the right genetic traits they were looking for. The contract wasn't for a one-time date. It was a formal agreement to have children together, with those children being raised to help improve the Valderi species. I stared at her, trying to process the words coming out of her mouth. It felt like I had fallen into the middle of a science fiction novel. Was this some kind of elaborate prank? Was she being serious? She wasn't laughing or even joking. She looked at me with such intensity that I started to wonder if she wasn't kidding after all. I couldn't wrap my head around it. A breeding contract. Was she serious? My stomach churned, and I started to feel a mix of confusion, disbelief, and anger. I had come out for a simple date, not to get involved in some intergalactic genetic program. I looked around the cafe, trying to get a sense of whether anyone else was hearing this conversation. But everyone seemed oblivious to the fact that a woman was offering me a contract to have kids with her species. I felt completely out of my element. "Lyra, this is insane," I stammered. "You're telling me that you want me to sign a contract to have children with you. Why? What's in it for me?" Her expression softened. She wasn't angry or defensive. She simply explained that it wasn't about what I could gain. It was about the future of her people. The Valderi were facing a serious genetic crisis, and they believed that human genetics could help them survive and thrive. She wasn't offering me riches or rewards. What she was asking for was far more important, something that would change the course of her people's history. "You don't have to decide right away," she said gently. "Take your time. But this is a serious offer, one that comes with responsibilities. There are no easy choices here." I sat there, completely stunned. I had never been good at handling big decisions, and this one felt impossible. I had always dreamed of doing something extraordinary with my life, but this was not the kind of extraordinary I had imagined. The weight of what she was saying began to sink in. Could I really say no to this? Could I refuse to be part of something this huge? At the same time, how could I possibly agree to something so bizarre? Lyra slid the contract across the table toward me. It was thick, formal, and covered in alien symbols. "Just think about it," she said softly, her voice almost hypnotic. "You don't have to sign it tonight, but I want you to understand what you're being offered." I took a deep breath and glanced down at the contract once more. My mind was racing, but I couldn't deny that a small part of me was intrigued. There was something about Lyra, something about the way she spoke and carried herself, that made me feel like this wasn't just some strange coincidence. There was a reason I was sitting here. There was a reason she was offering this to me. And for better or worse, I was going to have to decide what to do next. I sat there staring at the contract, my heart pounding in my chest. The cafe felt quieter than ever, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the entire world had paused, just waiting for me to make a decision. But how could I make a decision? I had never even imagined something like this would happen. Just a few hours ago, I was looking forward to a simple dinner with a woman I had met online, and now I was holding a contract that, if I signed it, could change the course of my life forever. Lyra was watching me closely, her eyes calm and steady. She wasn't pressuring me, but her presence was enough to make the situation feel more real. There was no denying it. What she was offering was no joke. The seriousness in her eyes told me that whatever this was, it had consequences, big ones. "Lyra," I began, but I didn't know how to finish the sentence. What could I possibly say? How do you react when someone offers you a breeding contract with an alien species? "Are you serious?" I finally managed to ask. "This is real." She nodded, her expression unwavering. "Yes, it's very real." I wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but at that moment, the most important one was already hanging in the air. "Why me?" I blurted out. "I mean, why are you asking me to do this? There are so many people out there, so many humans. Why me?" Lyra leaned back in her chair and sighed softly. She looked thoughtful for a moment, as if she was deciding how best to explain it. "You're not the only human with good genetics," she said slowly, "but you're one of the few who meet the specific criteria that we need. It's not just about your physical traits. It's about what you represent, your potential. You have the genetic qualities we're looking for, but it's more than that. There's something about you, something that made you stand out." I didn't know what to say to that. She was talking about me like I was some kind of rare animal or object to be studied, picked for a special purpose. The idea made me uncomfortable. It felt strange, almost like I was being treated like a tool or a specimen in some kind of grand scientific experiment. But there was also a part of me that couldn't ignore the reality of it all. I was sitting across from an alien, someone who wasn't even human, offering me a contract to help her people survive. The weight of what she was asking hit me harder with each passing second. "What happens if I say no?" I asked, my voice low, not even sure if I wanted to hear the answer. "What happens to you, or to me?" Lyra's expression softened, and she leaned in a little closer. "If you refuse, nothing happens immediately. We would part ways, and you would go back to your life. But for us, there would be consequences. The Valderi are a species in crisis. Our population is dwindling, and our genetics have become too homogeneous. We need diversity in our bloodlines to survive, to thrive. Rejecting the contract might not change anything for you, but for me and my people, it could mean disaster." I swallowed hard. It wasn't just about me, was it? It wasn't just about the strange offer or the bizarre situation I found myself in. There was something much bigger at stake here, something that was beyond my understanding. I had no idea what the Valderi were facing, but the way she described their crisis sounded serious. This wasn't just about having kids with someone from another species. It was about saving an entire civilization from extinction. "Okay, but," I paused, trying to process what she had just said. "If I agree, what exactly happens next? What do I have to do?" Lyra's eyes sparkled, though it wasn't excitement that I saw. It was a kind of hope. Hope that I would say yes. Hope that I would understand the gravity of the situation and make the right decision. "It's not just about signing the contract," she explained. "Once you agree, the next steps are complicated. We would begin by preparing you. There are medical procedures to ensure compatibility, and I would have to take care of my side as well. We would undergo treatments that will ensure our offspring meet the criteria we need. After that, you would—" "Wait," I interrupted, feeling a mix of panic and disbelief. "You're telling me that this is a breeding program? We would have to go through treatments and everything else?" Lyra nodded again, her face calm. "Yes, the process involves genetic enhancement on both sides. It's not just about having children for the sake of it. These children will carry the hope of my people's future. They will be a part of both our worlds." I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. I had no idea what she meant by genetic enhancement or carrying the hope of her people, but the words alone were enough to make my head spin. This wasn't some casual relationship, some fling that you'd get over in a few weeks. This was a major commitment, not just to her, but to an entire species. It was overwhelming. "But Lyra," I said, my voice shaky now, "this is too much. I don't know if I can do this. I didn't sign up for this. I was just here for dinner, to meet you, to see if we were a match. But this is—" My words trailed off. How could I even begin to describe how alien this felt? She reached across the table and placed her hand gently on mine. "I know this is a lot to take in. I didn't expect you to understand right away. But we don't have time. The Valderi can't wait forever. The situation is desperate. That's why I'm asking you to trust me. You don't have to make a decision tonight. But please, think about it. Think about what this could mean, not just for me, but for your species as well." Her words hit me harder than I expected. The mention of humanity, of Earth, made me pause. Was I really in a position to help save an entire civilization, one that I barely understood? Could I really be part of something so monumental? I sat back in my chair, my hands trembling slightly. I felt like I was in a dream. A part of me wanted to just walk out of the cafe and never look back, but another part of me was trying to process the weight of what she was saying. Could I say no? Could I turn my back on something that might be my only chance to make a difference on a galactic scale? Was I even ready for something like this? "You're asking me to sign my life away," I said, though my words felt weaker now, as if I wasn't sure anymore if I believed that. What if I'm not ready for something like this? What if I can't handle it? Lyra's voice was steady, almost soothing. "You don't have to handle it alone. This isn't just about me and you. It's about the future of both our species, and if you choose to be a part of it, we'll be in this together." Her reassurance did little to calm the storm inside me. How could I say yes to something I didn't fully understand? How could I make a decision that could change the fate of two species in one night? The weight of her words was suffocating. I didn't know what to do, and the more I thought about it, the harder it became to think of a way out. The air between us felt thick with unspoken tension, and the contract lay on the table like a challenge I wasn't sure I was ready to face. I needed answers. I needed time. But Lyra had made it clear. Time was running out. "I can't promise anything right now," I said, my voice a little hoarse. "I need time to think about it. This is too much for me to handle all at once." Lyra didn't argue. She didn't try to convince me further. She simply nodded, her expression unreadable. "Take all the time you need," she said softly. "But remember, the future of the Valdari is in your hands. Don't take too long." As I sat there, trying to digest everything she had said, one thing became clear. My life had just taken a sharp turn into the unknown. And whether I was ready for it or not, I would have to make a choice soon. The days following my meeting with Lyra were some of the strangest I had ever experienced. My mind was still reeling from the revelation that I was somehow involved in a breeding contract with an alien species, but as much as I tried to push the thought away, I couldn't escape the truth. Lyra wasn't just a woman from another country or culture. She was from a completely different world, and her people, the Valdari, had an entirely different way of living, thinking, and viewing life. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how little I understood about what I was being asked to do. Lyra had been patient, giving me the time I needed to process everything. But even after a few days of reflection, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I had never been someone who took big risks or made life-altering decisions on a whim. Yet here I was, staring at an offer that seemed to be beyond anything I could have imagined. When I arrived at the park, I saw Lyra waiting for me under a large tree. Her posture was elegant, as always, and there was a sense of calm around her that made the air feel less heavy. She was dressed in a simple but striking outfit, a deep blue robe-like garment that seemed to shimmer as if it had a life of its own. She looked like she had just stepped out of a dream. "Hi, Lyra." I greeted her, trying to sound as normal as possible, though I couldn't hide the fact that I felt out of place. "Hello," she said, offering a small, warm smile. "I'm glad you came. I know you have many questions, and I'm happy to answer them." "A breeding contract," I repeated, my voice sounding a little too loud in the quiet cafe. "What are you talking about?" Lyra remained calm, explaining that the document was a real binding contract. Her people, the Valdari, had been searching for humans with specific genetic traits. According to her, Earth's population had become valuable across the galaxy, and they wanted to ensure that certain human genetics were preserved and passed on. She went on to explain that I, apparently, had the right genetic traits they were looking for. The contract wasn't for a one-time date. It was a formal agreement to have children together, with those children being raised to help improve the Valdari species. I stared at her, trying to process the words coming out of her mouth. It felt like I had fallen into the middle of a science fiction novel. Was this some kind of elaborate prank? Was she being serious? She wasn't laughing or even joking. She looked at me with such intensity that I started to wonder if she wasn't kidding after all. I couldn't wrap my head around it. A breeding contract. Was she serious? My stomach churned, and I started to feel a mix of confusion, disbelief, and anger. I had come out for a simple date, not to get involved in some intergalactic genetic program. I looked around the cafe, trying to get a sense of whether anyone else was hearing this conversation. But everyone seemed oblivious to the fact that a woman was offering me a contract to have kids with her species. I felt completely out of my element. Lyra, this is insane, I stammered. You're telling me that you want me to sign a contract to have children with you. Why? What's in it for me? Her expression softened. She wasn't angry or defensive. She simply explained that it wasn't about what I could gain. It was about the future of her people. The Valderi were facing a serious genetic crisis, and they believed that human genetics could help them survive and thrive. She wasn't offering me riches or rewards. What she was asking for was far more important, something that would change the course of her people's history. You don't have to decide right away, she said gently. Take your time. But this is a serious offer, one that comes with responsibilities. There are no easy choices here. I sat there, completely stunned. I had never been good at handling big decisions, and this one felt impossible. I had always dreamed of doing something extraordinary with my life, but this was not the kind of extraordinary I had imagined. The weight of what she was saying began to sink in. Could I really say no to this? Could I refuse to be part of something this huge? At the same time, how could I possibly agree to something so bizarre? Lyra slid the contract across the table toward me. It was thick, formal, and covered in alien symbols. Just think about it, she said softly, her voice almost hypnotic. You don't have to sign it tonight, but I want you to understand what you're being offered. I took a deep breath and glanced down at the contract once more. My mind was racing, but I couldn't deny that a small part of me was intrigued. There was something about Lyra, something about the way she spoke and carried herself, that made me feel like this wasn't just some strange coincidence. There was a reason I was sitting here. There was a reason she was offering this to me. And for better or worse, I was going to have to decide what to do next. I sat there staring at the contract, my heart pounding in my chest. The cafe felt quieter than ever, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the entire world had paused, just waiting for me to make a decision. But how could I make a decision? I had never even imagined something like this would happen. Just a few hours ago, I was looking forward to a simple dinner with a woman I had met online, and now I was holding a contract that, if I signed it, could change the course of my life forever. Lyra was watching me closely, her eyes calm and steady. She wasn't pressuring me, but her presence was enough to make the situation feel more real. There was no denying it. What she was offering was no joke. The seriousness in her eyes told me that whatever this was, it had consequences, big ones. Lyra, I began, but I didn't know how to finish the sentence. What could I possibly say? How do you react when someone offers you a breeding contract with an alien species? Are you serious? I finally managed to ask. This is real. She nodded, her expression unwavering. Yes, it's very real. Lyra's gaze softened. I don't know what you would get from this. I can't promise you anything other than the knowledge that you're helping our people, but there's something to be said for that. There's meaning in knowing that you've contributed to something larger than yourself. I let her words sink in. In a way, I admired her. She wasn't trying to sell me a fantasy or make me feel like a hero. She was simply telling me the truth, as hard as it was to hear. And the truth was that this wasn't about my feelings or my life. This was about saving a species that might not survive without help. The shock of it all was starting to fade, and I could feel a new sense of clarity rising within me. It wasn't about whether I could understand everything right away. It was about recognizing the responsibility that came with this opportunity. Lyra wasn't asking me to fall in love with her or anyone else. She was asking me to do something that was bigger than both of us. To make a choice that would impact the future of her people and potentially mine as well. Lyra, I said after a long pause, I'm still not sure if I'm ready, but I want to learn more. I want to understand what it means and what this could mean for both our worlds. She smiled, a small, genuine smile that made me feel like I had made the right choice in asking her more questions. That's all I can ask for. I'll help you understand. I'll be patient. And with that, the conversation continued, and I realized that, as strange and difficult as this situation was, I was beginning to see the larger picture. The Valdari needed help, and somehow I was part of that solution. But understanding the cultural shock was just the beginning. The real challenge was deciding whether I was willing to take on that responsibility. Days passed in a blur after my meeting with Lyra. I couldn't stop thinking about what she had said. Every moment felt heavy, weighed down by the knowledge that I had a decision to make, one that would change not only my life, but the future of another species. The pressure was immense. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how big this choice was. I wasn't just deciding whether to help Lyra, or even whether I should have children with her for the survival of her people. I was deciding whether I could live with the consequences of my actions, no matter what I chose. I couldn't escape the idea that my life would never be the same after this. I kept trying to imagine what it would be like to sign the contract, to be part of something so grand, so significant. But I also imagined the other side, the side where I walked away and never looked back, where I stayed in my normal, comfortable life and forgot about the world of the Valdari. But every time I thought about walking away, I remembered Lyra's face, the quiet desperation in her eyes. She wasn't just asking for my help. She was asking for my trust. And I knew that, deep down, I couldn't ignore the responsibility that came with that. The Valdari needed me, whether I was ready for it or not. But still, the fear gnawed at me. Could I do this? Could I really make such a huge commitment? I decided to meet with Lyra again to talk it through. I had so many questions, so many doubts that I couldn't shake. Maybe I wasn't ready to decide yet, but I at least needed more clarity. I needed to understand the full scope of what I was about to agree to, so I could make an informed choice. When I arrived at the park where we'd met before, Lyra was already there, waiting for me. She looked calm, as usual, but I could sense the weight in her posture too. She had probably been thinking about this just as much as I had, wondering if I would say yes, or if I would walk away. "Hi, Lyra," I said, trying to sound normal, but I could feel the tension in my voice. "Hello," she greeted me, her smile warm but cautious. "I can see you've been thinking a lot." I nodded. "Yeah, I can't stop thinking about it, honestly. It's a huge decision, and I'm still not sure I'm ready to make it." I felt a sense of relief. Lyra wasn't asking me to force something that wasn't natural. She wasn't demanding that I have an emotional connection with her or the children. She was asking me to try, to see if I could make a difference, to see if I could help her people. But at the same time, she was giving me the freedom to walk away if it wasn't right for me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't keep delaying the decision. Time was running out. Lyra had explained that the Valdari needed my help urgently, and I had to decide if I was willing to take that on. The choice was bigger than just me. It was about the future of two species. Finally, I looked at her and said, "I've made my decision." Lyra's eyes searched my face, waiting for me to speak the words that would change everything. "I'll do it," I said, my voice steady. "I'll help you. I'll do whatever I can to help save your people." Lyra's expression softened, and for the first time since we met, she seemed genuinely relieved. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet but full of gratitude. "I know this isn't easy, but I believe in you, and I believe that together we can make this work." As I sat there with Lyra, my decision felt like it had been made in an instant. But I knew it wasn't that simple. This was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, obstacles I couldn't predict, and moments when I would doubt myself. But for the first time in days, I felt a sense of calm. I had made my choice, and now I was ready to face whatever came next. The decision had been made. There was no turning back now. I had agreed to help Lyra and the Valdari, and while a part of me still felt uncertain about what lay ahead, I knew that I was committed. The responsibility was enormous, and the weight of it all rested heavily on my shoulders. But there was also something else, a sense of purpose, as if I had found a mission that went beyond anything I could have imagined. I wasn't just a regular person anymore. I was part of something much bigger than myself. As soon as I had agreed to the arrangement, the next step was clear. The breeding ritual. Lyra had explained it to me in detail, but I still wasn't entirely sure what to expect. It wasn't like anything I had ever heard of, certainly not like the romantic or emotional relationships I was used to on Earth. This was about survival, about the future of the Valdari, and I had been chosen to play a pivotal role in ensuring that future. The days leading up to the ritual were a blur. I spent a lot of time thinking about what was coming. I had been through many medical evaluations in my life, but nothing like this. I had to undergo a series of tests to make sure my genetics were compatible with the Valdari. There were questions I had never imagined asking myself. Was my genetic material the right match? Would I be able to produce offspring that could help save a species? The stakes were high, and every test I took felt more surreal than the last. But despite all the uncertainty, there was something oddly comforting about the entire process. Lyra was with me every step of the way. She explained everything thoroughly, and her calm demeanor helped keep me grounded. She never once made me feel like I was just a tool or a pawn in some grand plan. Every time I questioned whether I was doing the right thing, she reassured me that this was important, not just for the Valdari, but for the world we both came from. Eventually, the day of the ritual arrived. I still didn't fully understand what it would involve, but I knew it was the final step. Lyra had told me it would be an intimate, private ceremony. It was meant to bond us together, not just in the physical sense, but emotionally and spiritually too. The ritual would be a symbol of our commitment to one another, as well as to the future of her people. I met Lyra in the evening, just as the sun was setting. The air was cooler now, and there was a sense of quiet anticipation as we walked toward the location where the ritual would take place. It was a secluded spot, a beautiful garden surrounded by lush trees and soft lighting. The place felt otherworldly, like something from a dream. As we entered the garden, Lyra led me to a stone platform at the center of the space. It was surrounded by flowers and small glowing lights that flickered like fireflies. There were no crowds, no other beings around, just the two of us, alone in this tranquil place. The atmosphere was serene, almost peaceful, and I could feel the tension in my body slowly starting to ease. "Are you ready?" Lyra asked softly, her eyes meeting mine with an expression that was both serious and gentle. She was wearing a simple yet elegant robe, something that shimmered faintly in the dim light. It wasn't like anything I had seen before, and it made her seem even more distant and otherworldly. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was a crucial moment for both of us. "I think so," I replied, though my voice didn't sound as confident as I had hoped. "I mean, I don't know exactly what to expect, but I'm here, and I'm willing to do this." Lyra smiled, a small, knowing smile. "I understand. This is a big step. But remember, this is not just about physical connection. It is a sacred act. It's about the survival of our species, the survival of your people as well." I nodded, trying to keep my focus. Lyra had told me many times that the act we were about to perform was deeply meaningful to her people. For the Valdari, it wasn't just about reproduction. It was a union, a merging of lives and futures. The ceremony had been passed down through generations, and it was considered a powerful and spiritual event. The more I learned about it, the more I realized that it was something that couldn't be taken lightly. "Are you ready to begin?" Lyra asked again, her voice gentle yet firm. I took a deep breath. "Yes, I am." Lyra moved toward the center of the stone platform and gestured for me to join her. As I stepped forward, I could feel a strange energy in the air. It wasn't anything physical. It wasn't like static electricity or an unusual sensation. It was something deeper, a kind of calm energy that seemed to fill the space around us. I didn't understand it, but it made me feel strangely grounded, like I was in the right place at the right time. Lyra raised her hands in a slow, deliberate motion, and I followed her lead, raising mine as well. She spoke softly in the language of her people, a language I had heard her use before but couldn't understand. The words were flowing and melodic, and even though I didn't know their meaning, I could feel their power. There was something ancient about the way she spoke, something that made me feel connected to her, and the ritual in a way I hadn't expected. As she spoke, the light around us seemed to change. It wasn't as bright, but it grew warmer, more soothing. The air around me felt thick with meaning, and I couldn't help but feel a strange bond forming between us. It wasn't just physical. It was as if we were somehow tied together, not just by the ritual, but by something deeper, something beyond understanding. This was bigger than me, bigger than us. When Lyra finished speaking, she looked at me with a soft expression. "Now we complete the bond," she said quietly. "Through the act, we will join together, not just as two individuals, but as part of something greater." The next moments felt like they passed in a blur. Everything around us seemed to fade away, and it was just the two of us. There was no fear, no uncertainty anymore, only a deep sense of connection, of understanding. This wasn't just about the physical act. It was about something much deeper. We were becoming part of something that transcended the simple nature of the ritual itself. We were participating in something sacred, something that would shape the future of both of our species. As we moved together in the way the ritual required, I could feel the weight of everything that had brought me here. The choice I had made wasn't just about biology or survival. It was about connecting with another life, someone who needed me in ways I hadn't fully understood before. It wasn't about romance, but it was still deeply personal. There was an emotional connection that began to form, not from love, but from shared purpose, shared responsibility. After the ritual ended, we stood there, still holding each other in the quiet aftermath. The air felt different now, lighter, more peaceful. We were no longer two strangers. We had formed a bond, a connection that neither of us had anticipated. "Thank you," Lyra said, her voice soft and sincere. "You've done more than you know." I looked at her, not sure what to say. I still didn't fully understand everything that had just happened, but I knew that this was only the beginning. The future of the Valderi was in my hands, and somehow that felt both terrifying and meaningful. "I don't know if I'll ever fully understand everything you've taught me," I said quietly. "But I do know that I'm committed. I'll do whatever it takes." Lyra smiled, her eyes bright with gratitude. "That's all I ask. You've already given us a chance. And for that, we are forever grateful." As we left the garden, side by side, I knew that my life had changed forever. The ritual wasn't just a moment, it was a turning point. It marked the beginning of something bigger than I could have ever imagined. I wasn't just part of this world anymore. I was part of something that spanned across galaxies, and somehow that made me feel both small and incredibly important. The breeding ritual had come to an end, but the true journey had just begun. The days after the ritual were both quiet and intense. The world around me hadn't changed in any obvious way, but I knew I was different now. My decision to help the Valderi had already set things in motion, and there was no going back. Everything had felt surreal before, but now it felt even more real. I was no longer just someone who had made a choice. I was someone who had committed to the future of an entire species. The gravity of it all began to settle in, and I realized that this wasn't just a one-time event. This was the beginning of something much bigger. In the days following the ritual, Lyra and I spent a lot of time together. We had agreed to stay close, to work together in the next stages of this new chapter. Though I wasn't sure what the future would look like, I knew that it would be a shared journey, one that would be shaped by our decisions, our actions, and our willingness to grow into this role. Lyra was patient, answering my questions, explaining the next steps, and giving me time to process everything. She had an air of calmness about her, as though nothing could rattle her. Her faith in me was unwavering, and I could feel that sense of trust growing between us. At times, I questioned my own readiness, but Lyra always reassured me. There was no room for self-doubt now, only the knowledge that I had already taken the first step. The following week was filled with preparations. There were more medical tests, but now they felt different. They were not just to make sure my genetics were compatible, but to track the changes that were happening inside me. It was strange, and at times, it felt like my body wasn't entirely my own. The Valderi had advanced technology that made these procedures feel almost effortless, but I still had moments of hesitation. I was aware that I was no longer just human in the traditional sense. My role had changed, and I had to embrace the responsibility that came with it. During one of our conversations, Lyra explained how the Valderi people were guided by the bond that had been formed during the ritual. This bond wasn't just about reproduction. It was a connection that would guide us as we moved forward. For the Valderi, the act was sacred, and they believed that the children born from this union would carry the strength of both species, an essential piece in the survival of their people. "I know this is new for you," Lyra said one afternoon as we walked through the same garden where we had held the ritual. "But for the Valderi, this is a sacred bond. It is about trust, commitment, and the future. It's not just about creating life, but about sustaining it." I nodded, trying to understand the depth of her words. It felt like I was entering a world where everything was more purposeful, more focused on survival and a greater good. But that also made me wonder, what would my role be in this new life I had chosen? "Lyra, I understand the importance of what we're doing," I said, my voice filled with uncertainty. "But I don't know if I'm ready to be a part of something this big. I'm not sure if I fully grasp what it means to be responsible for the future of your people." Lyra stopped walking and turned to face me. Her eyes were filled with compassion, but there was a quiet strength behind them. "You don't have to understand everything right now. The bond will guide you, and we will take it one step at a time. The path may not always be clear, but we will walk it together." Her words were comforting, but they also filled me with a sense of weight. There was a long journey ahead, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't just walking it for me, or even for Lyra. This was bigger than both of us. As the days passed, the connection between us began to deepen. It wasn't a romantic love, not in the traditional sense, but it was something significant. It was trust. It was understanding. It was a shared purpose. Lyra and I had entered into this union for the survival of her species, but somewhere along the way, I began to understand the magnitude of our bond. It wasn't just about us. It was about all the lives that would come after us. Our children, the future of the Valderi, our future. The day finally came when we learned the results of the tests. The doctors, using their advanced technology, confirmed that my genetics were compatible with Lyra's, and everything was in place for the next phase. We were ready. At this point, the changes in my body had become more apparent. It wasn't just the physical effects that I had felt at first. Now I could sense something deeper, an energy, a warmth that I couldn't fully describe. It wasn't like anything I had experienced before, but it felt natural. It felt like a connection that had always been there, even if I hadn't known it until now. Lyra smiled when we got the news. "It's time," she said softly. "The next part of our journey begins now." For me, it was still hard to wrap my head around everything. I had spent so much time wondering if I was doing the right thing, if I was capable of handling what came next. But now I realized that there was no more time for doubts. I had committed, and the path ahead would be paved by the choices we made together. The process of becoming a parent to the Valderi children was not like anything I had imagined. The Valderi had advanced medical technology that allowed for a smooth and natural integration of human and Valderi genetics. There were no complications, no major hurdles. The process, though strange and unfamiliar, felt almost seamless. The scientists and medical teams around us were calm and efficient, guiding us through each step. As I sat in the sterile medical room, watching as the procedure took place, I couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. It was one thing to agree to help the Valderi. It was another to see the process unfold. But the one thing I could rely on was the trust I had built with Lyra. This was something we had chosen together, something that would shape not only our lives but the lives of future generations. As the procedure continued, Lyra's presence beside me was a comfort. She had been through this before, in her own way, and though she didn't say much, I could tell that she was with me every step of the way. There was no fear in her eyes, just quiet strength. Her calm demeanor was a grounding force, and it made everything feel a little less overwhelming. When the procedure was complete, the room seemed to hum with energy. I could feel it in the air, a sort of electric charge that seemed to run through my veins. It was the bond, the same one Lyra had spoken of so many times. I couldn't explain it, but I could feel it. It was as if my connection to her and to the future we were building had deepened in a way I hadn't expected. For a few moments, we sat in silence, letting the magnitude of what had just happened settle over us. Then, Lyra looked at me with a gentle smile. "We have done it," she said softly. "We've taken the first step in ensuring the future of my people." I looked at her, not knowing what to say. The words seemed inadequate. And yet, I felt a strange peace. We had done it. The first step had been taken. Over the following weeks, the effects of the procedure began to show. The pregnancy, though not typical by human standards, was progressing smoothly. Lyra and I continued to spend time together, working through the challenges of preparing for the arrival of our children. It wasn't easy. There were moments of uncertainty, moments when the weight of the responsibility would hit me, but there were also moments of quiet joy. We had created something beautiful together, and though the future was still uncertain, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't alone. We were in this together. And so, this was our new beginning. A new life, a new purpose, and a new path that stretched out before us. It wasn't the future I had ever imagined for myself, but it was the future I had chosen. And as we moved forward, step by step, I knew that whatever came next, I would face it with Lyra by my side. We had made this choice together, and together, we would ensure that it was a choice that would change the world for the better.